there are just so many different contentious talking points for them to pass over together.
Yes, there really are. I think at this point, what Blinken's probably focused on is some of these issues of industrial capacity that the West has been concerned about. We heard Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen sort of hammer China on that when she was just in Beijing a couple of weeks ago, talking about these issues of economic imbalance across the world caused by cheap Chinese goods being exported elsewhere. Of course, China's hit back on some of those allegations. I think the other thing, too, that we've really got to hone in on is any concerns that the U.S. has about what kind of trade China is doing with Russia and how that's ultimately bolstering Russia's defense effort. We've also seen, in light of Yellen's visit just recently, that the U.S. is perhaps mulling additional sanctions on Chinese banks that maybe they think are aiding Russia. So I think these are really kind of these top-of-mind issues for Blinken as he meets in Shanghai with Communist Party officials. As you said, he might be meeting with Xi Jinping himself in Beijing tomorrow. I think all of that's really on his radar. And of course, all of this happening just as the U.S. has signed into law this possible ban or divestment legislation concerning TikTok.
What options do you think China has right now as it pertains to the TikTok story?
Well, there are a couple, David. So ultimately, look, I guess the China regulators have to approve this deal if it ends up being the case that ByteDance does want to go ahead and divest. Remember, what this legislation does is give ByteDance and TikTok 270 days to decide: do you want to pull out of the U.S. market entirely, or do you want to try divesting and giving it to another company? So Chinese regulators, of course, would have to approve any deal that goes through on that effort. The other thing, too, is that there could be some kind of a tit-for-tat measure. Perhaps it's that Beijing could try to retaliate with blocking some American tech firms in China. Of course, there's not too many that really operate there anymore.
Yeah, that's a point. I think, can we go back to the live shots as well? I think we're just, in fact, right now, speaking of Antony Blinken, he's in Shanghai. He's meeting with the party secretary there, Chen Jining, ahead, of course, of a possible meeting with Xi Jinping. More on, if you could talk more, because Meta's a big story today, and certainly the options on the table if China were to respond via the route of targeting, I'm loosely using that conceptually, of course, the word targeting, U.S. tech firms. Not a lot of them on social media in China anyway. So that presence has really scaled back.
Exactly. I mean, we've really seen that over the past several years. In particular, I mean, Meta does not have a major presence in China to that effect. We saw, LinkedIn recently pulled out all of its operations out of China. That was, Microsoft was notably one of the only ones with really, kind of a social media presence. You have essentially, because of the great Chinese firewall, really very limited access to a lot of the type of social media apps that you might otherwise think, would be operational within China. So yes, I think in terms of that level of retaliation, maybe not a whole lot that China can do. And we've also just seen in general so far, the response has been fairly muted toward this legislation anyway. And so we'll have to see how that develops, particularly during an election year. Remember, Donald Trump has said that if he's elected, he would try to, he actually is not really in favor of this legislation. So I think a lot's still up in the air before the end of the year.
Yeah, and just recapping, of course, you're taking a look at those live pictures there. Blinken meeting with the Shanghai Party secretary. But in the course of these discussions, and especially as we head into a key election year as well, we probably can't expect too much in the way of deliverables, anything concrete out of this, do you think?
No, probably not. I mean, we kind of saw this sort of similar dynamic play out when Yellen was just visiting recently as well. I mean, how much is there really going to be, in this U.S.-China relationship? I think at this point, particularly when, you rewind about, 18 months ago, 2 years, or so, you were really dealing with a lot of really heightened tensions between the U.S. and China. Remember that, I mean, Blinken was supposed to visit back in, early 2022. That visit was derailed by a spy balloon. They've just been able to get back to this point where the U.S. and China are just able to talk, and there's actually, officials that are going into China. So I think stability within the relationship, at least from the China side, is really what you kind of want to manage here, particularly because, as we've been talking about, we're going into a U.S. election year where Joe Biden obviously has been very tough on China through these sanctions and such. Trump has also pledged to be, somewhat tough on China as well. I mean, he's floated the idea of 60% the tariffs on Chinese goods. So there's a lot still at stake here as we get into November in particular.